Here it is. Got it. Done.
Here we are. Hello, everyone. My name is Deshauna Barber. I am President and CEO of Service Women's Action Network, and I am here with our Director of Government Relations, Lori Manning. Lori, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, sure. I've been with SWAN about 6 years now, working on government relations, and that means I do a lot of SWAN's interface with both the House of Representatives, the Senate, and also the Department of Veterans Affairs, the Department of Defense, and once in a while, the Government Accounting Office, GAO, often comes to talk to us when they're investigating certain things of interest to military women. And I spent more than 25 years in the United States Navy. I'm a retired Navy captain, and I really love doing this kind of work.
I love it. We've really had a chance to bond over the past 2.5 years. And we've done one fireside chat with you, I think back in 2020, it might have been. And I think having this fireside chat today and, knocking it out in the month of July is really important, because I don't know if we do enough updates when it comes to making sure that the SWAN community knows this is what we're doing. All the updates that we do are usually confined to either social media or it's confined to our newsletter. But having like a conversation and going back and forth about some of the things that's going on within SWAN, some of the work that we're doing, some of the things that we're paying attention to on the Hill, we don't really get a chance to really talk and talk about that publicly on this type of platform. So I'm really excited today to be able to just give everyone a quick update, what we're looking at, some of the things that's a priority for our organization this year, and what's to come. So I'm really, really, really excited to have you on this fireside chat, because obviously we do a lot of work together behind the scenes, but people don't get a chance to see your faces often in terms of a conversational discussion. Mostly you're the boss lady that's doing all the great interviews, and you're on the Hill. So I want everyone to be able to see you and recognize the great work that you do and that you have been doing for SWAN over the past 5 or 6 years. For those that don't know, a little bit of background about myself: I am officially a veteran as of last month. And it's been really great because now I am able to experience the work and the effects of what SWAN does on the veteran side. And I think that that's really awesome as well. As an organization, we do so much for veterans, and I've only been able to experience what we do for service members that are currently serving. So it's going to be really great for me to be able to experience and see that behind the scenes of how the work that we do actually affects veterans after they've walked out of the military or left the military or retired or, discharged out. So this is going to be a really great experience for myself to be able to experience as a vet. So anywho, so Lori, can you tell us a little bit about what are the big things that we should be looking for on the Hill right now, and what a SWAN member can do to be able to assist with the big things that we're looking out for?
Sure. And this is the perfect time of the year for us to be talking about this, because we're right in the middle of 2 very important cycles. One is what they call the Veterans Omnibus Bill, which puts together the budget for the Department of Veterans Affairs for next year and includes many policy things. And also both the House and the Senate each work on a version of what's called the National Defense Authorization Act, which deals with policy for the military. And I'll talk about more of that when a little bit later in this discussion. But I want to start off with the veterans bills, because we've had a lot of good opportunities this year. The veterans bill starts off with a big hearing in March. That's a joint hearing with the Senate and the House committees, and all the members are there from all the political parties. And for the first time this year, SWAN was invited to give testimony on that. And I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And so it's a little bit like hitting the big time. We're now considered one of those groups whose input you want. And I think that's very good for SWAN. And then last week, I was invited to attend a Veterans Roundtable with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, and many members of the Veterans Affairs Committee. And when they come and stay. Speaker Pelosi spent almost 2 hours with us, which is an unheard of amount of time for somebody as busy as she is. she loves veterans. Most people don't know that. Most people would think the opposite, but I think many of her brothers were veterans, and she's just got a soft spot for us. And at that veterans meeting, I was able to ask her a question, which she responded to, and then several of the other veterans did, which is deals with infertility among veterans and the question of abortion. And on the infertility side, right now, you have to be service connected before VA can treat you. And that service connection has to be specifically for infertility.
Right.
And you also have to be in a heterosexual marriage, and both partners have to be able to produce what they call their own gametes. In English, that's eggs and sperm. So it's much narrower than it needs to be, because there are certainly single veterans or same-sex married veterans who are also service connected. And that's one of the big discussion issues at VA right now. And they gave me and all the other veterans who were there a little bit of good insight into the fact that they are looking at this. They are working with the Department of Veterans Affairs on this and with the current administration. And it doesn't particularly break along party lines, except for those who kind of believe that IVF is a form of abortion because you fertilize more eggs than you might lose. Anyway, that's something that we'll be following all this year. Also on the veteran side, some good news, at least in the part of the bill where they're at, because they go through various voting regimes. It looks like so far removal of copays for contraceptions that some veterans pay is in the bill right now. We'll have to see if it stays there, but that's something that people have been asking for a long time. So that's been very good news also. And the other thing that is a very big item for all veterans right now is what's called the PACT Act, which deals with the veterans who are suffering from exposure to burn pits and all kinds of other toxic wastes. That has been in kind of a do loop because it's what they call a revenue bill, which means it has to be started in the House and then the Senate votes. So the House voted on it favorably, then the Senate voted on favorably, but they made some amendments which affected the money piece of it, the revenue piece of it. So it had to go back to the House to be revoted on again. Then it went back to the Senate to be revoted on again. And we're hoping that in the next week or so, it will be actually passed. It's got the votes. It's just these little red tapey things that are holding it up right now. So that's a recap of where we are in the veterans and the things that we're particularly watching. On the active duty National Guard and Reserve side, we're in the midst of what they call the NDAA cycle. And the House and the Senate are in different places. Last week, the House of Representatives voted on their version of the 2023 NDAA. And it was the full House that voted. And there are some interesting provisions in that, which may or may not still be in it when the president signs it someday, but one particularly affects Army people. And the Army is going to have to develop two different physical fitness tests. Most of the services now have one, but the Army is going to have two by order of Congress, one for people in combat MOSs and one for people who aren't. And the first thing they have to do is decide what the combat MOSs are and convince Congress that they actually are combat MOSs, as opposed to something we're trying to sneak in on the list. And then probably they'll keep using some version of the new Army's combat physical fitness test, but the repetitions or the lengths of time you get to do something will turn up harder for those combat MOSs. And it's not the people in a combat unit, it's the people in the MOS. Because that's a question that comes up sometimes. And if you happen to be the quartermaster or something in a combat unit, you don't have to do the harder. You can if you want, And it's gender neutral for the combat people. For the non-combat people, it will continue to be by sex and age, the standards set. But for those in combat, the sex standards are not going to be broken up by men and women. They're just going to be the same for everyone. I believe there will still be some age differential. So it's hard to do some of those things when you're 40 plus.
Agreed.
So another very good thing that's in the House version is a requirement that the National Guard Bureau and probably some outside organizations do a complete study on the problems the National Guard has handling military sexual assault and harassment. The basic problem springs from the fact that the Uniform Code of Military Justice is federal law. But when you're in the National Guard, you're only under the federal law when you've been activated. Most of the time you're under state law. And we have 50 states and some territories, each with different rules, different cultures within their National Guards. And there has people who have been sexually assaulted have had very frustrating times because it's not, they don't have, when you're not activated in the federal role, it's the local police officers or sheriffs or whoever that do investigations. And they all have, it can be a very small town or it can be a giant city. And some of these charges tend to get lost in the bigness of the big police forces, or the small ones often don't have police really thoroughly trained in how to investigate this sort of thing. And they're finally trying to do something about this problem. Too many people have gotten away with sexual assault in the Guard. And let's see, what else is there on the House version? Yes, and this one applies to not so much the currently serving people, but to retirees and family members. And there's going in right now in that bill, it provides a 1 year temporary only relief from copays for contraceptives for family members, retirees, or active duty people in some cases. And the reason it's a 1 year is because it costs money. And the idea here is to say, well, we'll do it for 1 year so the camel gets his nose under the tent. And then once you've done it for a year, it's hard to take it back. So it becomes easier to make it a continuing thing. So that's what's going on with that. The Senate side, their bill has been put together, and you can look at the bills yourself. You just go to, say, the Senate Armed Services Committee website or the House Armed Services Committee website, and there'll be a link right there, and you can read them. And once you get used to the way they're laid out, it's not that hard to follow if you're really like grooving on some of this stuff. And some people do, and some people would rather go.
Yeah, it could be a bit overwhelming.
That the Senate bill has that same provision I mentioned about the Army having to have tougher standards for combat MOSs than non-combat, and it's worded exactly the same. So it looks like the House and the Senate were talking to each other about that, which means it'll probably be in the final version of the bill. But it's something we'll be watching at SWAN to make sure nobody is trying to game it, to make it harder for women than men, or just choosing tests that are that the people are really good at when they're a 24-year-old as opposed to a 48-year-old. So we'll be watching to make sure that the standards meet the requirement that they be regular, recurring, and fair to everybody who's currently serving in the MOS successfully. It's the point shouldn't be to kick people out, but to keep them fit for their job. The other big thing that's there again this year that was removed last year is a modernization of the Selective Service Act. Now, this is in the Senate as passed by the Senate Armed Services Committee only. The Senate has not voted on the full bill yet, and won't until at least September. Or if it's like last year, it might be December. So it may be a while before the Senate actually gets to vote on some of these things. But what that would do is require all US citizens and permanent residents on their 18th birthday and through their 26th birthday to stay registered with the Selective Service. That means men and women. And it means all of them unless they're in jail, in a mental health facility, or currently on active duty. But registering with Selective Service is not the same as being drafted.
Right.
In order to draft somebody, Congress has to authorize a draft first. And we haven't had an authorized draft in this country since 1972. And then they can make provision in there for certain people who we shouldn't draft. For instance, people who are physically disabled in some way that they couldn't fight. People who might, in Vietnam, for instance, we exempted students, we exempted fathers of young families. So there are, and various sorts of exemptions could be set up. And also, just because you're drafted doesn't mean you end up in the infantry. That's a fear that people have had about women going in, that they'd be in the infantry, and some of them might be, but they would have to meet the infantry standards, which, as we just saw, are going to get tougher for both men and women. So that's there. Another thing is that if anybody who follows this may remember, there were some very big changes made to the military justice system last year by the National Defense Act, including removal from the commander of the authority to investigate and to make decisions on whether something was going to go to trial. And Congress gave the Department of Defense 2 years to get some of these things set up, because some of them involve a lot. And what they're going to have is what they call a special trial counsel. And it will be an admiral or a general, and it will, that person will be part of the staff of the Secretary of the Service, so that they're out from under all military control, from uniform military control. And that person will oversee the investigations. There'll be probably staff members around the world. Investigations will have to be done by criminal investigators who are trained in it. And that the general counsel, instead of the accused commander, will decide whether something is going to a court martial. And so that is a biggie, but it takes a while to get all that organized. There's also a provision in that bill saying that not only should we do a better job investigating and court-martialing or not court-martialing or following through on an investigation, but we need to be better, the military needs to be better at preventing sexual assault to begin with.
Right.
And there's a provision in last year's NDAA to set up a prevention research. It will be a heavy research, what works, what doesn't. And so they will be following that. And there are provisions in the new NDAA to make the services at the secretarial level provide briefings on how they're going in setting up what has to be set up since last year, that they have until the end of 2023 to set up. At these offices, the special trial counsels, the payroll, because some of the people working may be civilians, getting the instructions out, getting the Uniform Code of Military Justice changed to where it has to. They've got 2 years, and usually Congress gives the services 2 years to do something and they never think back about it. Now, through this NDAA, on the Senate side at least, they're going to make the service secretaries brief them every 6 months on where things stand, and which is a very good thing, because these things can fall away, particularly when they cost money or involve having to hire people. So the Secretary of Defense and the Congress It's the Senate Armed Services and the House Armed Services committees that will receive these briefings, and they can take care of the money problems. They can make sure that money is there, and they can do what's called fencing it. That's saying you can only spend this funding on that thing. You can't say, oh, there's $1 million and I'm going to move it over and buy a ship with it. So that's a very good provision that's there. And there are also a few residual authorities that commanders had over courts martial that are, if this bill passes, will be removed from them. It'll go to the trial counsel, or in some cases, if it's the summary court martial, the judge. And those involve grants of immunity to a witness coming forward. COs won't be able to do that or deny it anymore. Requests for depositions of witnesses, and requests to pay for expert witnesses when all of that will be taken out of the commander's hands and given to the trial counsel.
Good.
And then there's one more round of reports that will start in 2025. By that time, all these changes should have been implemented and things should be going forward. So now we have to see if what we set up last year actually worked.
Mm-hmm.
And so there'll be a series of briefings beginning in 2025 every year, looking at what has or hasn't changed. So the briefings on where we stand in getting things done will be done twice a year in 23 and 24. Then this new kind of briefing on, okay, how are things going? Is this working? Will be happen once a year for 5 years after that, so out to 2030. So I'm really impressed that they are not only changing things, but they're building in checks and balances to see if what they expect to happen does happen. And that's all very good. Now that's what's in, also there's one other thing that has been on the mind of some active duty women. There was a pilot program set up last year on what they call extra medical support. And that means if you're in the hospital, and in this case, it's to do with having a baby,
Mm-hmm.
Extra support might be something like a doula or a lactation coach.
Right.
And last year, they ordered a pilot for all TRICARE users, but it was to be done in TRICARE users who were using civilian hospitals, not those who were using the military hospitals. And that was because the military hospitals already had authorization from Congress to hire doulas and lactation coaches. But the money that would come out of was the same pot of money where you might be hiring your orthopedic surgeon or your X-ray technicians from. So only one MTF in the country had a lactation coach and none had doulas. And once that became apparent, what this new legislation will do is take the last 4 years. It's a 5-year pilot. It'll take the final 4 years of the experiment and open it to the MTFs so that at least a few of the MTFs will be part of the pilot, so that there will be some active duty women and family members who will be eligible for that wouldn't have been without this. So those are some of the big things that we'll be following in this year's legislation on both the Senate and House side, and on both the veterans and active duty side.
It's a lot. That was a lot of stuff. And I know that, a lot of our members are probably looking like, wow, this is so much stuff that that you're working on, that SWAN's working on, the things that we're paying attention to. Of those things, is there anything that our members can do to assist? Is there anything that our members can do to make sure that some of our priorities are actually going to be followed through?
Well, sure, and their own priorities. You could always call your own representative or
Right.
senator, and you can call the DC office, but you can also call the office in your state. And sometimes you get through a lot easier to the state offices. And some of the representatives or the senators have many of those in a big state like California. So if there's something that I mentioned or that you've heard about on your own, send them a letter, send them an email. Most of them have a form email right on their websites, and you can vote, you can be vocal about it. You can get your friends if they're in, and your family members, anybody who thinks it's a good idea that there shouldn't be contraceptive co-pays, for instance, or that it's a really good idea that we're setting up some follow-through stuff to observe how the new sexual assault requirements pan out. So get in touch with your congressman, and you can do that on your own. You can do it as a group, but be vocal. Let them know what you think. And you can call all of them. You can call both your senators. You don't have to pick one. You can call your representative, and you can remind them that, hey, November is an election.
Yeah.
And and you can vote. You can vote.
Yes.
If somebody is supportive of these things that you're supporting for, take the time to get out and vote on election day or
Agreed.
beforehand, depending on what your state rules are. So those are things anybody can do, and they're free.
Agreed.
So I think, and they're basic, but they're important. They're really important.
I love that.
Have an
I think
idea.
that's the priority.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have an idea of something that's not here that you'd like to see, you can write us about it, or you can just, as people do sometimes, this doula thing came out of some Air Force veterans that wondered why it wasn't available. And they just put on there, I'm brave enough to call my members of Congress and see if we can get something going. So anybody can do that. That's one of the benefits of living here.
I agree. That's what comes with democracy. So it's really great that we are in a country where we can make a phone call, we can send an email. And I think that that's probably how we're going to wrap this up. And I'm so thankful again, Lori, for you taking the time to be able to run through all the amazing things that, is on SWAN's plate. Especially those things that really do affect our vets and our service members. But I think that in closing, I think that we can all take away, those that are watching. You can make a phone call, you can send an email, you can write a letter, anything that you believe really aligns with, something that you might be passionate about, something that you think is important to you. We all have the autonomy to be able to make those decisions and take those actions into our own hands. So if you really did enjoy some of the things that Lori was talking about, feel free to find more information on our website, which is servicewomen.org. And be sure to keep up with our social media sites, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and that's it. I don't think we're on anything. Twitter. There we go. Twitter. It's so many social media sites. But yes, be sure to follow us there, and then also go to our website and sign up for our mailing list so you can be able to get a newsletter each month and keep up with what we're doing the month prior. So thank you all so much for tuning in, and we will see you again at next month's Fireside Chat. Thanks so much.
Bye, everybody.